Our readings this morning have reminded us of two great temples in Jerusalem. The first reading is the story of how David collected together enough resources from his people for the building of the first temple, which was ultimately built by his son, Solomon. And in the gospel reading, we've heard about Jesus purifying what was the second temple, Herod's temple. And we've also, in the reading from St. Paul, been reminded that it is not buildings as such that are the building blocks of the kingdom, but people. But we do like our holy places, don't we? There are many holy places around the world. They are rather, those places which somehow feel as though the veil between our mortal world and the spiritual world has become more fragile. Some people call them touching places or thin places. Places, that is, where you almost feel you can reach out and touch the hand of God. Now, according to the Hebrew scriptures, prior to the temples we've heard readings about this morning, Bethel was one such place. After his prophetic dream of a ladder ascending to heaven, a great staircase with angels going up and down it, Jacob called that place the house of God, which is what Beth-El means. El was one of the early names for God. Beth-El, the house of El, the house of God. And for many generations, it was one of Israel's holiest shrines. The Ark of the Covenant was kept there until it was transferred to Jerusalem, to Solomon's temple. Prophets and leaders would go to Beth-El to seek God's wisdom and instruction. Ironically, though, for such a holy place, no one can say with certainty today where Beth-El actually was. Attributions of holiness have been given to many places over the millennia. For devotees of our patron saint, Saint Faith of Agen, then the Abbey Church of Conques in France is one such place. There are laid the bones of the young martyr, cruelly murdered under the rule of the Emperor Diocletian because she refused to renounce her faith in Jesus Christ. My goodness, I wonder how many of us would have such courage. I'm not sure that I would. Incidentally, Bishop John and Janet visited Conques just a few years ago and wrote about the experience in one of our Corona Chronicles over the last couple of years. But do ask them after the service. And by the way, after the service, we are warmly invited to gather together for a bit of a bring and share lunch. There's lots of yummy food over there. So do have an opportunity after the service to chat with each other. Where is your thin place? Where is it that you find the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds to be somehow made thinner? For some, perhaps it's a beautiful landscape, a hilltop, a valley, a beach. Perhaps for others, it will be a building like this, in which hundreds of years of prayer and worship have somehow soaked into the stones. Holy places, then, are integral to religious faith, aren't they? And yet there's a danger, isn't there, in investing all our energy into buildings. Anyone who has toured the ruins of the great abbey churches around the UK, or indeed anyone who has seen the ruins of the Jerusalem temples, both temples gone, will know that faith is not kept alive by holy places. They are physical things, and like all physical things, they must pass. In fact, sometimes holy buildings can even get in the way a bit. In the temple in Jerusalem, for example, the human priests created a holy of holies, a place in which God was said to actually dwell. To some extent, our sanctuary mirrors some aspects of that in having an altar within it, for example. But in the temple in Jerusalem, it was a place so holy that the high priest could only go into it on one day of the year and after some very special rites of purification. The New Testament tells us that the curtain which separated the Holy of Holies was torn down at the death of Jesus. It was not a helpful picture of God to have God locked up behind a curtain in a holy, holy place, was it? Not a helpful picture. So it had to go. And as Jesus died upon the cross, the curtain came down. God was not locked up anymore in the back corner of a temple. In fact, you and I are now where God dwells. Not in buildings of stone, but in living flesh and blood. We are the temples of God. Even our own beautiful building, and I count us extremely blessed to have it, for all the benefit that it is as a building here in the middle of the town, so much loved and such a sign of God. Even this building has its problems in terms of the story that it tells about God. For example, the sanctuary being up there, just as I alluded just now, well, it could suggest that God is distant from us, that he's a long way away, that he can only be approached with great humility and suffering and worry and fear. Could suggest that, couldn't it? I hope it doesn't to anyone here, but it might be more helpful if the altar were in the middle of the building from time to time, reminding us that God is in the middle of us and amongst us and moving amongst us and energizing us and helping us to carry out God's mission. Some of our images of Jesus in this building are a little bit problematic too, aren't they? If you can, perhaps over lunch, or if you stop and stay for some refreshment, wander up and have a close look at the Jesus who is on the cross right above the altar. He's blonde and blue-eyed, yeah? Probably not what Jesus looked like, I think we can probably say. He was probably clean-shaven. That guy has a beard. He probably wasn't blonde. He was probably dark-haired. He probably had short hair, not the long hair that he's often depicted. The fact is, we don't know. But it's not terribly helpful to show a picture of Jesus as a blonde Anglo-Saxon up there, is it? And yet, as those who steward and care for this building throughout the week will testify, it has immense value to all those who enter its doors throughout the week seeking peace or a place to be with God. And that's why, for all its theological confusion, I think that our continuing efforts to refurbish and maintain this place for the town right now and the future generations who will worship here, it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile effort, isn't it? Its very age and its architectural idiosyncrasies are precisely what draw in seekers of a thin place, a touching place. But at the same time, let's not forget that this building is not the church. It's the building that the church gathers in. This is just a shell, a shelter from the rain and the cold, although perhaps not quite so much this year. Fundamentally, it's no different from the Church of St. Nicholas that I visited in 2015 in Nsawam in Ghana. That church was a bamboo frame with some palm leaves laid over the top to provide a bit of shelter from the blistering sun. Fundamentally, this building is no different to that. It's a rain shelter. It keeps the rain off the heads of the church, of you and me. For as St. Peter says, we are living stones built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood. We are the church, not these stones. We could, if the diocese would ever let us, over my dead body, tear the place down. We could just leave a smoking pile of rubble in the middle of Havant. That would not mean that the church had gone. The people who make up the church of Havant and of Westlea are the church. And we would still be here, wouldn't we? Even if we were a bit damp in the rain. The church is the holy house of spiritual people with heaven in their hearts and the needs of the world on their mind. People with so much faith that they too, if ever called upon, might also demonstrate the certainty of purpose and belief of our own patron, our example, Saint Faith of Agen. Amen. Amen.